what would happen is a couple or a family with income of $100,000 or below, they'd get a $100,000 exemption. That's what the plan has modeled out to do it that way. So if you're $50,000 for an individual, a single person, $100,000 for a couple or a family, if you're earning at that level or below, you're not going to have to file that return anymore. After that, that's when the income tax kicks in. The way the plan works is you can get an offset to your payroll taxes. That's what you would do at withhold, and there could be the issuance of government debit cards for some to draw benefits to keep them whole on if they get a child credit. The plan, which is based on, this plan was developed by Columbia professor Michael Gratz, who I worked with a little bit, knew him a little bit from my days when I was running the IRS. He actually served in the first Bush administration, and it's gone through all kinds of scrutiny. What it does is it keeps your taxes in place depending on whatever level you're at. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't change that distribution of burden. You may be paying it as consumption tax instead of income tax, which is easier for you, but you're not going to be paying more or less. It keeps you pretty much whole. And that's a great thing, because we need any change we make should be revenue neutral, but it also should leave in that progressivity that we have and that relative burden. So we keep people at the low end whole by the payroll tax withholding adjustments or a benefit for credits that can be issued that they would get from a government debit card.
And how much of an adjustment on the income tax rates for those who make $100,000 or more?
Well, the rates would kick in at about 14% and go up to 30, 31, 32. I'd make some adjustments for on the Gretz plan to foster more incentives for small businesses and agriculture, manufacturing, research. So the rates, he says it would be at 31, which for the high end now, that contrasts really to 43 when you add the 39, and then there's a surtax that's in there with the Affordable Care Act. This would knock it down by, whatever you do, it would come down at the high end by about 10 points. So this ought to generate growth. And on the business side, it would take down the corporate rates to a much more competitive level, down to around 15, 16, 17%, depending on what you do. What you're doing is you're leaving the relative burden of the different strata in place. And that's a good thing, because you're saying we're going to change this system, keep it revenue neutral. Total amount of money coming in initially will be the same. And the high end, the middle, and the low end will pay what they're paying now. So that's positive. And then after that, you hopefully will see, and the economists agree, that a consumption tax will lead to better savings and more growth. You'll see higher growth. Higher growth will help, because we've got to, again, let's talk about the rather dire situation we face in the out years. We need to have lower deficits, otherwise the debt as a percentage of GDP is going to eat our lunch. And what I say, the Republicans, gets a little complicated, but the Republicans are embracing something called dynamic scoring, that if you change the tax system and you project higher growth, you ought to be able to recognize that. I say fine, that's great, but I wouldn't use that to lower rates. I would do just what I've advocated. You'd have a balanced system, keep people's contribution in line, and be revenue neutral. Then if you got higher growth, what I would do is I would plow that into rebuilding our defenses. I think that it's pretty well entrenched in certain regards. I mean, some of the provisions, which are quite popular in terms of extending benefits to children up to age 26, what are we going to do? Throw out all of those things? Removing certain caps on catastrophic care? Are you going to pick and choose on that? I think that what we need to do is work on things, and we'll have an interesting moment here when the Supreme Court rules. The Republicans are, I think, developing finally some good ideas on how to deal with this. I would suggest, though, that there's some things that we all ought to be able to agree on right away, like changing the definition of what is full-time work. We've gutted the part-time work week for people in the entertainment industry and in hospitality and restaurants. I can tell you this, businesses don't want to carry someone between 30 and 40 hours a week anymore. They're slimming it down so that they don't have to pay the benefits. I think we should do tort reform so that doctors are prescribing medical care based on what they think is appropriate, rather than just worried about what the lawyers are doing. I think we should allow these insurance companies to sell across state lines so it's more competitive and the premiums come down. There are a host of things we can do. What I'm trying to do is be realistic. It's great to say repeal it, but some of that stuff is already very entrenched. And frankly, the healthcare companies have adjusted their policies and their procedures to reflect this. It's sad, but what you've had is a dynamic where we've intervened in 17% of the economy, and the Republicans won't change it because they say we're going to kill it, and the Democrats won't change it because they say it's going to be gutted. That's not responsible government. Think about anybody, a local businessman. He builds a business, he gets financing, $250,000, $500,000, whatever it takes. Maybe it's a bigger business, he's got financing for $2 million. What does he do? Does he say, okay, I've got my money and I've got my business plan, now I'm not going to change it until I'm either broke or Intel? That's not what he does. He adjusts as he goes along. We have a very significant statute here. We need to make changes to it. I'm trying to get something done, not just trying to have rhetoric on both sides. I think it can be done. Look, if you go back over our history, we've amended the Constitution a couple dozen times. And we haven't been doing it lately, though. I think that part of what I'm doing is I'm trying to have a serious conversation with Americans, starting here in Iowa, respecting the traditional role that you play. People here, they're very civically engaged. And I think if we talk about these issues, yes, there's a path to do all of these things and take a look at whether we should amend the Constitution to provide that single term. I think people will entertain that conversation, but right now we're sort of in this horrible situation where people say certain things aren't viable politically. I don't think that's right. I think that Wall Street can't buy this election. They don't anoint who's going to become president. The voters do, starting here in Iowa, and they don't say what we should be talking about. I think these are real issues, and that they'll do better than the folks in Washington would have you believe. That's a very legitimate question, and people feel, I think, both ways on that. I will tell you this. I think the Congress has become absolutely dysfunctional in terms of the legislation it puts out. But one of the things that I can say from personal experience, I testified 50 times before Congress when I was running the IRS. And that oversight from the people's representatives to the executive branch is essential. So you do need people serving in the Congress who know something. They aren't just grandstanding, but they actually know something about intelligence or about our military affairs or our judicial system, our economic affairs. So I'm interested in that subject. I understand the attractiveness of it. I don't like the fact that the system's awash in money and that the K Street has its claws into these people. But I see that issue both ways. I think it's far easier to say the executive branch, where there's one person in charge of all those agencies, that you want that individual working full-time. And I always say maybe that website would have worked if the president had spent a little more time asking about the rollout of the Affordable Care Act instead of traveling around raising money for the 2012 campaign.
The website you're referring to is healthcare.gov.
Yeah, exactly. Which we all know it was a bungled rollout. Well, I would make 2 points. First, other countries should be doing more. We have very real pressure on the NATO alliance now. The people who traditionally been our closest allies in military affairs, some of those countries have really depleted what they're doing. I would hope that they would do more. The second point I would suggest is that, of course, we need to enter into reforms at the Pentagon, make the weapons buying more sensible, make sure we've got the benefits programs correctly stated, and so we need to be saving money where we can. But look, the world is a much more dangerous place than it was 6 years ago. I say the hopes of the Nobel Committee have not been realized when they awarded the Peace Prize to our president. The world is not safer, it's more dangerous, and we've seen deterioration of democracy in the last 6 years. So America needs to stand tall, and it needs to have a sober appreciation of the more dangerous world. We've got Putin, who is expanding his reach at the cost of other countries. You've got a mess in the Mideast and the threat of ISIS, and you have an ever more muscular China. All this means we need to be hard-headed about our approach to these things. We need to do it responsibly. We can't be wasting money. We need to make reforms. I would suggest to you, I know a lot about the government. I've been in the government. It's complex. I've spent time at the White House Budget Office. I know what it takes to make reforms that can stick. We need to do all that. But if we shirk our duties, the world depends on us to be, like it or not, to have a strong stance and to confront evil when necessary.